While you were learning to put two monsters with different names on the field, I was studying the knights. Hello, my name is Ross Murphy. A couple months ago, I managed to get my first ever invite with Noble Knights, and then 2 weeks ago, I did it again, getting 18th place at the Atlanta Regional in September 2019. Finishing with a record of 7-2, pretty decent performance for the Knights. I often see people asking questions, how to play the deck, why do you run the cards you do, what does the deck do, do you in fact rely on your opponent never reading your cards? And I often see bad guides for the deck, or lists that seem stuck in 2014, so I decided I would just go ahead and make my own profile, upload it, and share a little bit about how the deck plays, why I run the decks I run, and how you too can take Knights to success. So this is going to be a bit of a long video because I can't help but ramble on. So it'll be split into a couple different portions. We'll have the deck, we'll discuss how to play it, and a couple of frequently asked questions. Everything will be broken up in timestamps in the description, as well as a typed out version of the list if that's all you'd like. Without anything else to say, let's get into the list. Alright, so the first card we're going to look at is probably the best known of the Knights. This is Noble Knight Medraut. You do still run him at 3 in my opinion, though there is talk of cutting him down, and he's a bit strange. So he summons another Noble Knight from the deck by destroying an arm that he is equipped with, and when he doesn't have a sword, he's actually considered a normal monster. When he does, he becomes a level 5 dark. Now, in the old days of the deck, when it was new, before we got the latest waves in Soul Fusion and Cybernetic Horizon, you kind of needed him. He was your starter, and so a lot of people haven't moved past the idea that the deck is Medraut or Dai. It's not. The deck has changed significantly, but he's still really good. He summons bodies out. Popping the sword will let you move it onto Borz, which is the ultimate target you want it on. I still think he's worth running at 3, but he is not the best monster in the deck anymore, not by a long shot. I would say that honor instead goes to Brothers, which we also run at 3. Brothers is a really, really good monster with 2 effects. The first is that when he's normaled, you can special summon from your hand 2 additional Noble Knights in exchange for locking yourself out of anything except Noble Knights for the rest of the turn. And that is one of the better ways to get play started if you don't have a more generic way in. The Xenolock does hurt, but it's not the end of the world. That said, the more important function for him is that he can recycle 3 arms or knights in the grave to draw a card. You is not once per turn, it's soft once per turn, so as long as you can keep bringing these guys out, you can keep doing it. I have seen people resolve him 4, 5, even 6 times in one turn if you really want to flex on someone and draw a bunch of cards. Proper managing of your resources by knowing what to put back with Brothers to keep your grind going is essential to playing the deck well. And so it's important to bear in mind always, what do you have in your grave, in your deck, in your extra, and what can you put back with Brothers. Floating into this guy is very important to keep your momentum going, and it's one of the most difficult to learn things you need to manage. Now, if he was not the best monster in the deck, the next one certainly would be, and that is Borz. Now, Borz has never been better. It used to be that you ran 1 or 2. He was good to get your swords in the graveyard, so you ran him at 2 or 3. Then we got Isolde, the lake monster, and he became much less important, and he was usually run at 1 to get Gwynhwyfar in the grave. And then we got the trap, and that changed things, because as we'll get to later, the trap is busted, and you want it in your grave turn 1, as no matter what. So you run 3 of him to make sure you have the most chances to resolve him as possible. You can summon him off Isolde, you can summon him off Medraut, and you can just normal summon him or special him with Brothers. He, like Medraut, becomes a level 5 dark if he is equipped with a sword, otherwise he's a level 4 light normal. And when he has a sword, he can take 3 noble arms from your deck, reveal them, your opponent picks 1 at random to put in your hand, the other 2 go to the graveyard. You will almost always do 2 traps and 1 Gwynhwyfar with this. If you already opened Gwynhwyfar, do 3 traps instead. Resolving Borz turn 1 is your most important priority, and you should do everything in your power to make that happen. Getting a sword onto him can mean going a little out of your way, equipping him from the grave onto a king and floating them off. Do it, it's worth it. Next up in the Knights, we're going to run 3 each of the in-theme extenders. That would be Gawayn and Custennin. Gawayn is the more generic of the 2. If you control a light normal monster, which as we discussed is Medraut and Borz, as well as 2 more we haven't gotten to yet, you can summon them in defense mode from your hand, not once per turn. You can just spam these guys out. very useful. You want bodies on board to make your plays maximize on your Gawayns. The next is Custennin. His summoning condition is only once per turn, but it's also pretty easy to resolve. It's if you have a noble arms on the field. So anytime you've got a sword, you can bring him out. If he's used to make an extra deck monster, a Synchro Xyz or Link, a Noble Knight one, then you gain an additional effect. The monster summoned will gain the ability to grant you an additional normal summon this turn of a Noble Knight in exchange for locking your Noble Knights for the rest of the turn. Right now in the TCG this is mandatory, so it can be a little tricky to play around, but it's also pretty useful. In the OCG, his printing is a little different, and it's actually an optional effect, and the normal he grants you is generic. If we get that errata, it'll make him 10 times better, but he's already good enough to run at 3. That's the last of the knights you run at 3. Next we're going to go into the 1-ofs, and these are the techs. First is Galahad. So Galahad is another one of the level 4 light normals. He does not become level 5 dark on his sword, but he does get an effect. That effect lets you target a Noble Knight in the graveyard, add it to your hand, and destroy an arms on the field. Generally, you're going to be adding back your extenders. For example, if he has a sword, you can add back Gawayn, destroy the sword, making him a normal again, special Gawayn, and keep going. You only run him at 1 because he's not a starter. You can get him from the deck pretty easily when you want him. He's a great extender and definitely worth the 1-of slot, though, in my opinion. Now we have Drystain. Drystain is probably the most useful of the 1-ofs in a lot of ways. He's great utility. He's got 2 primary effects. The first is when he's equipped with a sword, you can destroy a card in the field. And the second is when he's on the field along with another knight, your opponent cannot target monsters you control for effects or attacks if they have less than 1800 attack. It's great for protecting your low attack monsters like Isolde, for defending when they've done things like half your attacks, such as with Monarchs, with True Draco Apocalypse. You can use it to protect an Apollousa who's gotten her attack dropped really low. You can summon it from deck with the trap, which again we'll get to in a moment, but I'm kind of giving it away there. So bringing him out at the right time to force your opponent to play around his protection, generally on their turn, so they can't attack what your weaker stuff. Or if they target something with removal that has a sword on it, you can bring him out and the sword will float onto him and destroy a card. Very useful. He's usually going to be your summon on the opponent's turn if you decide to make one because of how much utility he provides. Next, we're going to have the 2 level 5s, Hector and Lancelot. Hector is the dragon ruler of the archetype. You can banish 2 noble knights from your graveyard to summon him from your hand or grave. You can only do this once per turn, but even still, he's a level 5 that recurs himself from the graveyard every turn, making him very useful to have in play for extending turn after turn into your grind games. Dragon rulers were meta deck for a reason. Being a level 5 lets you go into rank 5 plays. Being a dark lets you combo well with Gwynhwyfar, which we'll get to in a moment. He's just very good. You're generally going to want to get him into the grave as early as possible while still making sure to hit all your other important plays. Just a good body to have. Lancelot, meanwhile, a little weirder summoning condition. So he summons himself from the hand or grave not once per turn by sending a normal monster to the graveyard, a light normal. So it's a little tricky to do. However, in exchange, he contributes any noble knight on the field to search in arms. So his main utility early game is to unbrick strange hands. Like, let's say you had Brothers Borz on another knight, and then 2 cards that are dead for whatever reason. You can Brothers out Borz and the knight, Brothers and the other knight into Isolde summon him tribute Isolde, get a sword on Borz, do your Borz resolve, and then put the 2 into a king. Good for unbricking hands. In the later game, he can get you arms when you need it. He can send himself back to make rank 5 plays easier. It's useful to have in the graveyard, not as much as Hector though, because his revive condition is a little weirder. The next level 1 is going to be Iyvanne, or 1-ups, I apologize. Iyvanne, when he is equipped with a sword, all other noble knights gain 500 attack, and when you equip him with the sword, he will summon a token to the field. The token is 1000 normal. This is useful because you can summon Gawayn off of him. You cannot, however, send it for Lancelot because tokens cannot go to the grave. Still, it's a good way to help get extra damage on board for OTKing, so it's useful to have the 1-of. I don't find I use him that much. Some people use him a lot more, but still useful. We've got room. Next up, we're running 2 copies of Vanilla Artorigus, normal monster, so you can summon Gawayn. He's also useful for another card we're going to get to in a minute. You don't really need 2 of them. 1 is okay, but I had the spot, and it does help a little bit with reducing the number of dead hands to have the second one. If I had to cut a card, it would be the second one, but it was fine. Now we've got Gwynhwyfar, Queen of Noble Arms. So she is a fake equip spell, basically. She can be equipped to a monster from the hand or grave, which is why you want to get her in the grave with Lancelot or with Borz pretty early on. A sword that you can access every turn is really useful to trigger the effects that require them. She gives any monster she's equipped to 300 attack, and if it's a light monster, if it would be destroyed by a card effect, you can destroy her instead. If it's a dark monster, it gains a catastrophe-like effect. So when it does battle, you can destroy her to destroy the monster it's battling. This is very useful to clear weird threats, and you'll regularly want to leave her on a dark monster, if not on a king, to provide a little bit of board threat, as well as to bring it onto an Hector or Lance you revive each turn to clear unusual things. It doesn't help against indestructible things, but everything else it's really useful for. And now we're going to have 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Hand Trap, a good one. It's no surprise. Yeah, you don't hand trap. Some people say you don't run them right now. I still think it's worth it. It's the most generic, which is why it's the one I main. I side it out for more matchup specific ones pretty often, but there really doesn't exist a deck in the meta that is not affected by Ash, so it's good to have. And rounding out the monsters, we have 1 copy of Ultra Athlete Midfielder. I don't know what it does. I've never read it. It doesn't matter, honestly, because to get into the spells. 3 copies of Ultra Athlete Signing Deal, and now you're going to start to see a little bit of the philosophy behind 60 cards, which we'll touch in later. Signing Deal lets me summon 1 Ultra Athlete monster from my deck in exchange for paying life points equal to its level times 300. So for the low cost of 1200 life points, that's less than a Solemn Strike, you can summon 1 warrior from your deck. And if you remember, our Link monster is 2 generic warriors. Goki's taught us that pretty well. That's why the Midfielder. Some people run Perfect Ace instead because you can summon it off his soul to have a negate if you really need to. I go back and forth. You can normal summon him if you hard draw him as the Garnet. It's either one's fine, honestly. Slightly lower life point cost. I do side this engine out a lot when I'm going close to time, so that is a bit of a risk. What I will say is I'm considering trying the Sky Striker engine instead, which is triple engage 1 drone. We'll see. Both have their advantages. You can activate this at any time, whereas Sky Striker you have to have no many monster zones. Continuing the theme of generic extenders, we have 3 copies of Instant Fusion. Summon a Warrior Fusion from the extra deck, which you can use to go into Assault. Very useful. And 3 copies of Unexpected Dai. If you control no monsters, you can summon 1 normal monster from your deck. It's going to be our Artorigus, King of Noble Knights. Yeah, it's hard to knock a free summon, so that's why you're running him. Yeah, the goal is just to get bodies on board turn 1 to go into his soul and start your plays, and that's why we're running all the generic extenders. Taking a break from those, triple Heritage of the Chalice. So this is the in-theme ROTA that was added in Soul Fusion, I believe. What this does is it lets you add a Noble Knight or monster or Noble Arms card from your deck to your hand, which, I mean, obviously a searcher is never bad. If a Noble Knight monster with a sword is destroyed by a battle, you can add it from the grave back to your hand, but you can only use each effect once per turn. Recurring ROTA, you run it at 3 of, obviously. You know, there's really no reason not to. We're going to save the arms for a minute because those are complicated. Got 3 copies of Twin Twisters. This took the place of my second hand trap. This format, I think it was a good call. We're entering a very control-heavy format, and Twin Twisters is good against most decks. Even decks it's not good against is usually alright, with a couple exceptions. I did side it out from time to time, but usually it was good to have, and I prefer to see it than not. The discard doesn't hurt. You usually have something in your hand that's either dead or not that useful, or even that you want in the grave. So it's perfectly fine to take stuff out. Warrior deck, ROTA adds a warrior monster. That's pretty self-explanatory. Generic extender, back from the ban list, Monster Reborn. Very nice to have special summons, warriors to extend your plays farther. If you're feeling cheeky, you can steal your opponent's big boss. Can't claim to have done that much, but it comes up. Double or nothing. For some reason, Konami decided that any deck that puts 2 level 4s on the field should be able to OTK, and here we are. The combo involves dipping into the extra deck, so I'll explain that when we get there in a second. You may already know it because it was made famous by a Sky Striker player. Going into the swords. 2 Caliburn, 2 Arfudytyr, 1 Clarent, 1 Gallatin, 2 Destiny, 1 Excaliburn. There's a lot of discussion as to the right number of swords to run, and the majority of players in the competitive scene tend to agree the answer is 9. If you're playing 40 card, 8 is acceptable, but you're playing 40 card, which is not. Just kidding. Anyway, so the thing with 9 swords is that it allows you to always open 1, which you want to open 1 while still having enough in deck to resolve a sword twice before your brothers recycle. You know, there's a bit of room here with Gwen and the 3 searchers. You're actually running 13 cards that are swords, giving you about a 75% chance of opening one turn 1 and 60. You know, you kind of want a little more than that, but you don't want to open 2 or 3. You know, we've all been there where you open a bunch of swords. So this is kind of the magic number. Generally, you want to maximize names in deck at all times, because that is how you resolve a sword, sends different named swords. So you're going to double up on the ones you're regularly going to be equipping, and single up on the rest of them. The quirk here is Excaliburn, so we're going to get to that in a second. So 2 Arfudytyr, it's the only proactive sword. It lets you destroy a set card in the field. Opening it is really nice going second against any sort of control deck. It lets you just continuously remove threats from the board. Anything that's putting a bunch of traps down, you're going to want to be able to remove them. Face down monsters, things that got Book of Moon, anything like that. Caliburn lets you gain 500 life points and win in time. It also gives 500 attack. Just useful to have. Opening it in time is kind of cheesy, but it's good. Destiny, once per turn if it would be destroyed. It is not. Of note, that burns off before Gwynhwyfar, because Gwynhwyfar says if it would be destroyed, this says it just isn't. As it can't be destroyed, it's protection, easy to use, easy to resolve, good while you're going into your combos, protecting things like Ghost Ogre. Another good at 2. Clarent is a name. You don't use them. Occasionally you do. You pay 500 life points and the equipped monster can attack directly. You can cheese wins with it, but it's not going to be something that comes up every game. Gallatin is plus 1,000 attack for when you really just need that big number to swing into something. Excaliburn. Almost every list runs 2 Excaliburn. I don't think that's correct. All the other swords have a unique property, and that is once per turn if they're destroyed, you can re-equip them onto a noble knight you control. This is what allows you to use some of your combos, like the well-known Medraut into another Borz, because you destroy a sword, it floats up. Excaliburn is the only one that does not float. For that reason, it's the worst one to open. In exchange, it has 2 really good effects. The first is grants target immunity to what it's equipped to. Obviously, this is great for dealing with Widow Anchor, for dealing with any of the target to flip face down monsters. It's good for dealing with the Borz to a point. You know, if it targets, it removes. Excaliburn flat out says you can't, and people are generally not going to realize that until they've already thought their way into a targeting play. It also lets you banish it from the graveyard to rank up a Noble Knight Xyz monster, allowing you to switch between your rank 4 and the other 4 and 4 and 5 and 5 and 4. Then you may say, well, hang on, target immunity is great and you're banishing it, so wouldn't you want a second one so you can keep doing that? Yes. However, because it doesn't equip, it's more difficult to play with, so I'd rather open a different arms than this one. And because I usually only banish it when I'm getting ready to finish the game, put myself into a state to win, I don't find I miss it once it's gone. If I do, I was losing that game anyway. I have run at one for about a year now, and I like that a lot. Rounding things up with the traps, we have 3 copies of Shade Brigade. Back to the generic extenders, it is a trap that summons itself as a warrior the turn it's set if you have no traps in grave, just helping you go into assault faster. And finally, Until Noble Arms are needed once again. The best card in the deck, hands down. 2 effects. The first one is that you can flip it up and it becomes a pot of duality. Reveal cards on top of your deck up to the number of Noble Arms spells you control. Add 1 of choice to your hand and put the rest back in any order you want. And you have not lived until you've added a hand trap off that and watched your opponent's heart sink, such as hitting Lancia against Orchest. That's good. Really nice. That's not why it's busted. So you recall I said Borz setting this to the grave turn 1 is a high priority, and that's because when it's in the grave, except the turn it was sent there, you can banish it to summon from your deck 1 Noble Knight with a name different from all in your field, or in your grave and on your field. This is how you're extending to turn 2. If you dump 2 of these, turn 1, you have a follow-up play set up before committing your normal. You can also summon Drystain on your opponent's turn for disruption. You can summon Brothers with its 2400 defense to block attacks. You can get any knight you need. Getting this in the grave is your number 1 priority. It is a fantastic card and should always be run at 3, no less. Alright, so moving on to the extra inside. We start with one copy of Invoked Raijin. This is our instant fusion target. It's the best warrior to summon off of it. The level doesn't really matter. It's important that it has a decent effect. If you're facing going second into something where you have a negate, like let's say a Vortex Dragon on the field, if you're facing Pendulums, he's a good summon because he can bait the negate and absorb that for you by forcing it with his Book of Moon effect. So he's the best one to run. Other good choices that are popular: Carbon Dollar Warrior if you're running generic rank 4s, stuff like that. More generics, we have the Utopia package. So I mentioned Utopia double and double nothing earlier. This is the easy 10,000 attack combo. The way it works is you make Utopia double, you detach a material to search double or nothing, and then rank up into a double attack Utopia at 5,000. Attack with Utopia, detach one to negate the attack. Double nothing says when an attack is negated, you can target that monster. It can attack again and double damage. That puts it at 10,000 attack. So it's good for any rank 4 capable deck, and this is fun. We have 3 generic Link 3s. It's going to be Borload to clear out difficult to remove monsters like Avramax, Boral Sword to help facilitate OTKs, and a Palooza. Hands where you can get this out turn 1 aren't that common, but they do exist. When they do, it's nice. You get a couple negates out of it, and when its attack drops low, you can protect it by summoning Drystain from your deck with once again, and then they can't attack into it because she'll have below 1800 attack. So that's really nice. In theme, we're going to have 3 copies of Isolde, 2 Tales of Noble Knights. This is our Link monster, rose to notoriety thanks to Goki. So she is great. You want 3 of her. You're going to use 3 of her pretty often in these duels. You're going to be trying to use her every turn. You're often going to need to recycle her with brothers to keep them in the game. So the first effect is when she's summoned, she can add a warrior to your hand from the deck, but you can't normal special or use the effect of monsters with that name for the rest of the turn. So you're generally going to be searching out brothers with that effect. But if you're summoning brothers, you're going to go often Hector, because he's good to have in his hand for next turn. And if you don't have that, maybe Iyvanne to go for the OTK. I would say generally brothers, Hector, and Iyvanne in that order, depending on the hand, but you really got to kind of feel it out and see what you're planning to do with next turn. But to get that's a setup. And its other effect is you can send equip spells with different names from your deck to your hand, or from your deck to your grave, to summon a monster with a level equal to the number you sent. And that's why it's so important to maintain certain counts of arms in the deck. You want to always make sure you have the right number of spells in deck to summon what you want. All of our targets are level 4 or 5, so you need 4 or 5 spells with unique names. And you put them back with brothers. Managing which ones you want to send is important. That's why generally you're first going to start by pulling out 1 of each of your 2-ofs, and then some of the 1-ofs as well, going from there. As far as our in-theme Xyz, we have 2 copies of Artorigus, King of Noble Knights. That's the rank 4. He equips himself with 3 swords from the grave on summon, and when he has swords, or he doesn't have that swords, you can attach material to destroy spells and traps in the field up to the number of swords you control. Crucially, this doesn't target, so that can be used to sort of bypass some of the quirkier target protected spells and traps. Really good just to, we're in a backer heavy format. You can loop up and down between these guys to clear threats from the board. The rank 5 Artorigus, Sacred Noble Knight of King Artorigus. His effect is to attach 1 to pop a monster on the field. He also will equip himself with 3 swords on summon. And if he leaves the field for any reason, he is going to float into another Noble Knight from your grave. Now that's important, because what you will often be doing with him is making him, clearing a threat, and then linking him away into an Isolde in order to trigger the float into another monster you may need, such as brothers, for example, to shuffle them back and keep going, which will then let you make another Xyz to continue clearing threats. You'll notice I only run 2 of him, and yet I once resolved 4 of him in 1 turn by having 2 of them, resolving them, linking them into a solo, floating into 2 more materials, and so on and so forth. So it can be pretty good. He's generally one of the better ones to end on turn 1. Tricky to clear when he's fully equipped, and if they do clear him, he floats. Just all around a good card. And finally, the new Xyz, Sacred Noble Knight of King Custennin. So this is the newest of them. Unlike the others, he does not equip with swords from grave. He also is unique because he can be made with any number of materials, and then his effect is you can detach however many materials you want to balance that many cards on the field. So he's generally your first thing you want to make going second, because he can help break boards. You know, if you try and clear threats and they negate and destroy it, it'll trigger his other effect, which is if he's destroyed, he can Xyz summon another king from your extra deck and then equip himself. So, you know, if they have a negate on board, make him attempt to bounce it, they'll chain to destroy, it'll float into that, that'll pop another thing, and then you can link that away and float into another monster and keep extending. So Custennin is really good for breaking boards, clearing indestructible threats because he does bounce. He targets, which is the only downside, but I mean, he's still really, really good, and you're definitely going to want to run him. That concludes the extra, so we'll finish up with the side deck. 3 copies of Nibiru, the new board breaker from the Megatins. Honestly, really underperformed for me. I just didn't face anything that was particularly susceptible to it, and that's going to happen in this current Control Heavy format, which we're ironically only in because of this card. People shifted to decks that aren't as weak to it. You know, the only deck in the format right now that I would say really dies, Salamangreat, I didn't face that, and Orcust, you know, you might think, oh, it's easy to resolve against Orcust, and I did multiple times, but they can often extend through it. It's pretty mad. I still think it's worth having if you're unlucky enough to face something like a Pendulum, which I did, but they got the negate out first, or it can still hurt Orcust. It's alright. Then 3 copies of Lancia. Fantastic against Orcust, really good. Definitely recommended as long as with Orcust in the format. Okay against Thunder Dragons, I guess. Not the best. I mean, I think it's worth running. It'll weaken their board, but it by no means stops them. So yeah, Lancia is, but right now it's a good card. Triple Ghost Ogre, the only card in the side where I really did not find a reason to use it. You know, it's good against a lot of stuff, good against strikers. Problem is something else is usually better. I will probably be swapping this out for something like Red Reboot for the rest of the format, just because back row is so prevalent, and I really did not find myself using this much. Triple Droll, great card against any deck that decides it really wants to, you know, burn its whole hand or whole deck into its hand. Especially good against decks like Striker. I faced Necroz actually, which again Droll's really good against. I like it right now. It's a good side option. And finally, 3 copies of our in-theme hand trap, Morgan, Enchantress of Avalon. Honestly, she's not that great, but I really like her, so I'm running her. Deal with it. So the way she works is you can discard her when your opponent activates a card effect, and you control a knight and an arms. Negate it, or sorry, destroy the arms, and if you do, negate the effect. So the reason, you know, people always say, main her. The problem is she requires setup, which other hand traps don't, which inherently makes her worse than others. She's not searchable, so, you know, that's a problem. If we could search her, if she was a warrior, for example, you could search her up a soul. Yeah, I'd run one in the main, but you can't. So she needs setup. So I actually tend to side her in when I know I'm going first, because then she kind of acts as a dual purpose. She's a called by the grave for most of our combos, because you'll generally hit a sword and a knight, and then if they don't have a disrupt for it, she's a disrupt going into the next turn. So I tend to side her in if I know I'm going first. Other than that, she lives in the side deck, and honestly, it's more because I really like her. You don't need to feel obligated to run her. I wish she was better. Alright, and that finishes up the deck list. So with that, we're going to move straight on into the most common questions I see about the deck, and then after we finish up there, we'll go into a little bit of a kind of combo tutorial-esque thing. Alright, so that was the deck list. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of insight into my ratios and how I run them. So I'm going to address some of the more common questions about this deck and try and maybe educate on why I built it the way I did. And the first question often is 60 cards. Why? You almost certainly notice that this list is not 40. It's rather hefty. There were a lot of cards in it. And people who ask, why would you play 60? It often boils down to one main complaint, and that is, don't you need to see Medraut more often? Because they're remembering the deck used to kind of live or die based on whether or not they saw it. And the answer is no. The deck has 2 primary goals. The first goal is to resolve Borz. You want to resolve him as often as possible. You run 3 of him, you run 4 cards that search him, you got 3 cards that summon him from deck. all of those reasons to see him. And the second goal is to resolve Isolde and send your sword to the graveyard. Now, if you're running 60, doesn't that reduce your chance of seeing Borz and a sword? And the answer is kind of. However, Borz is taken care of by the fact that we're running a lot of cards. We push ourselves up by 60 by adding generic extenders. These cards summon a warrior onto the field. It doesn't really matter what it is, it's a warrior, to go into Isolde. And Isolde will summon the Borz from deck for us. So really what we're running is a bunch of cards that let us not only more efficiently access our two primary goals, but let us play through disruptions by putting bodies on board without committing a normal summon. So that let us build bigger boards by extending out how many monsters we have on the field. Generic extenders are kind of the name of the game for this deck, because you're really not aiming for a specific setup, you're just aiming to hit a checklist of goals, and all of those resolve around can you reliably make Isolde into Borz. As far as the swords go, yes, you do have a slightly lower rate of seeing a sword, but you also have a much lower rate of seeing multiple swords, because if you have ever opened a hand that looks like this, you cry. It's terrible. So, that as well as a couple guards, the level 5s you generally don't want in your hand. They're very useful, but in hand they're dead, and when I play around 40 card builds, I usually cut them. A couple of 1-ups that just, they're nice text, but they don't really advance your game state at all. These are all things that you don't want in your hand, and so you can bury them by increasing the deck size, reducing the rate of seeing them. You compensate for the lack of consistency by adding generic extenders, which, if anything, improve your game. Any two extenders is Isolde into Borz without committing a normal, which is really, really good. Now, it is true, the other common criticism is that you don't see your side cards as much. That's true. That is the trade-off you make going to 60 cards, and it's why I'll say it's not perfect. However, I will say that the majority of the players who have done well with this deck have switched to 60. On the Noble Knight Discord, basically everyone goes to 60 eventually. Everyone, including myself, starts out at 40, then they go 45, then they go 50, then they go 55, and finally they reach 60 and they don't go back. It has consistently proven to be the best deck, and if you're worried about how often can you hit your end goals, the other day I did 100 test hands and I hit Borz Resolved in 85 of them. Another member of the Discord, Alex, he did 40 test hands and hit it in 39 of them, so it's pretty consistent. So that's why we run 60 cards. Now, the next question, I'm actually going to make a two-parter, and is why don't you run X? Now, there are lots of Noble Knight cards we don't run, but there's two in particular that usually get asked about. The first is Merlin, sitting here in the binder. He will never leave. And the second is Glory, which I have right here. These two cards are terrible, but people don't always realize that. So we'll start with Merlin. Merlin is a Lone Fire Blossom with restrictions. He states that during the you contribute him to special summon any Noble Knight from your deck, but the trade-off is that you cannot summon monsters that are not Noble Knights the turn you use this effect. Unlike every other Xenolock, it's the whole turn, not the rest of the turn, which means you can't use any of your generic extenders. In addition, because he is a tribute to summon effect, he's susceptible to Ash, he's susceptible to Call by the Grave, General Negation, and if he gets hit by that, because you can't use your extenders, your turn ends. So he's a risk. He's summon a monster in exchange for risking your whole turn being over with an empty field. That's not a risk anyone should take. Yes, he could get you Medraut, but Medraut doesn't do anything on his own. You need a sword to use Medraut. And as I've already stated, the deck really isn't about Medraut anymore. So, yes, you can get a knight, but you can generally already hit your goals without risking emptying your field. So for that reason, Merlin is not worth running. He does have a cool One Direct Seize effect in the grave, still not worth it. The other card is Glory, Glory of the Noble Knights. Now this is an interesting card because what it does is it's a quick effect, a quick play spell to equip an arms from your deck to a knight on the field. There is only one time you should run this, and that's if you're rolling old school Drystain control, because you can equip a spell to Drystain on your opponent's turn to trigger his pop effect. The thing about Glory is people often see it as it gets you any arms you need, or it gets you extra arms in the deck. To the first point, I'll say you don't ever need specific arms, you just need an arms. When you're picking and choosing is when you're equipping from the grave with your kings. in which case you're picking and choosing already. So that's silly. As far as the second point, it's another arms in the deck. Yes, just run another arms. The card is exactly the same from a function standpoint in your hand as a sword would be. And so you have to treat that slot as, is it better as glory, or is it better as a sword? And if you think it's better as a sword, add a sword in that slot, even if, if you want more swords. Because what glory does is it removes arms from deck, and that's where you need them to resolve as sold. So every time you activate glory, you're fundamentally removing 2 arms from the available pool, which means you're much more likely to make a sold no longer able to summon something. It's much better to just run the swords. If you want to fill that slot, put another sword in. Do not run glory. It is not worth it. Now, there are other cards in the archetype that we don't run: Bedivere, Pelennor, Percival, Round Table, Avalon, Lady of the Lake, and the Big Synchro, I believe, is all of them. They are all varying degrees of not worth it to terrible. Lady used to be good in some sorcerer-based builds that would let you continually link spam her away because she revives herself on any level 5. That's it. The rest of them just aren't really worth it at the moment. But I often hear, Merlin and Glory, and those 2 cards are frequently seen in builds, but they shouldn't be. They're terrible. So those are, the most common questions about the build. So the next question I'm going to talk about is, what does your main board look like? And the answer is irrelevant. The deck is not really focused around turboing out the same turn 1 board as every turn. Back when we had Summon Sorceress, we had to have an optimal board. Any 3 warriors would get you to Summon Sorceress, Top-Logic Bomber Dragon, pointing to the rank 5 king, which you could trigger the trap on the enemy's turn to summon a monster. To trigger Bomber, the king will be protected by his swords. Without Sorceress, it's much harder. The current Link 4 board would be a Palooza with another knight, generally a king, and the ability to summon Drystain, but you need 5 monsters to do it, so it's much, much trickier. Summon Sorceress loss really did hurt the deck's ability to do that, and forced you to be a lot more clever in how you make your plays. But that's okay, because your turn 1 is not that important as far as what you do. It's about what you set up, because if you resolve Borz, you have your trap engraved, so you can summon things, and you resolve a sold, so you have a follow-up monster in hand, and swords engraved to equip. As long as you survive turn 2, and you are generally going to have something that's pretty hard to, fully clear, you're usually going to survive, then when turn 3 comes around, you're all set up to just go right in and start breaking the board, moving for the kill. So don't worry too much that your end board doesn't look that strong, and don't skip the important things to try and make a board fancier than it needs to be. Don't overextend yourself, because that's not what you're trying to do here. You want to, get all your setup done, and then wait a turn, and then kill the next turn. The deck excels at its grind game. You can usually out-resource your opponent if you have to. So don't worry about it too much. So that covers that. And then the final question I often hear is, doesn't this deck die to kaijus? No, it doesn't. Sorry. The deck used to focus on turning out a king, and that was it. And you were really dedicated in that goal. And then when that happened, obviously getting your king tributed away would feel sad. But now, because you're just setting up turn 1, if they kaiju your king, so what? You're set up. If they, especially if you have something else to float the swords onto, if you can chain Drystain, well, you can't chain Drystain to a kaiju because they're tributing for cost. But anyway, if you've got a way to put something to re-equip the swords onto, it's really good. It's unfortunate because it's an easy out, but you can look at it as they spent a card from their hand to remove a threat that you didn't really care if it lasted anyway, and if it's the rank 5 king, it floats. So, yeah, it's not a big deal. Kaijus are fine. The deck is much more about outgrinding your opponent, about gaining that advantage, than it is about protecting the tower. So I wouldn't be concerned about that, personally. So yeah, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly shuffle this deck, and we're going to look at a couple hands in order. I'm going to show you how I play them out to give you an idea of how the deck combos now. Alright, so I shuffled the deck, and we're going to go ahead and draw the first hand and take a look at it. So we have Signing Deal, Dai, Custennin, Artorigus, and ROTA. is actually a really good hand for demonstrating both the reason we run generic extenders in 60, and actually to show how just because you didn't open in arms doesn't mean you didn't open the way to resolve Borz. So we're going to start with Unexpected Dai to summon a vanilla from the deck. And for the purposes of this, we're going to assume we're not getting ashed, but even if we did get ashed, this hand actually does some pretty cool stuff. So we're going to summon out vanilla Artorigus. Next, we're going to do Signing Deal. So Signing Deal is going to summon a UA monster from our deck at the cost of 1,200 life points, or 300 times its level. So let me just go ahead and dig through this 60 card deck, looking for it. Finding a 1 of in a 60 card deck is always fun. How about that, near the front? I'm going to summon Midfielder. Now, what we next are going to do is ROTA to get our Borz. So just like before, dig through this. And there's our Borz. I'm going to link away the two that we have special summoned for Isolde, Two Tails of the Noble Knights. And on summon, we'll use her effect to summon a knight that we will not be normally in this case, or especially. And for these purposes, I think what I would like to do is grab myself a copy of Brothers. So I'll go ahead and do that. Next what we're going to do is we're going to use Isolde's effect to summon a Noble Knight from the deck. I'm going to send 4 arms to the grave. So there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and Caliburn makes 4. 4 swords. To summon level 4, and I think for these purposes we're going to grab a copy of Custennin, or Gawayn. We're going to normal summon Custennin. I'm going to overlay these two into the rank 4 king, Arthur. Now what this does is on summon, 2 things will happen. First, his effect he gained from Custennin to get us an extra normal summon, and second, he will equip himself with 3 swords from the graveyard. And we'll grab Destiny, Excaliburn, and Caliburn. Don't forget to use Caliburn's effect to gain 500 life points at this time. Now because we have an extra normal summon of a Noble Knight granted to us by Arthur via Custennin, we could now normal summon the Borz that we added earlier with ROTA. Activate his effect, detach 1 to destroy spells and traps on the field. And we'll choose to destroy Caliburn. Caliburn will re-equip itself onto Borz, gain 500 more. And then we can activate Borz's effect to take Gwynhwyfar and 2 copies of the trap. Add 1 to our hand at random, put the other 2 in grave. I'm going to say in this case that one of the traps ended up in our hand. Doesn't really matter which, but that's what you prefer. And we can set the trap, activate Gwynhwyfar's effect to equip onto Borz. Borz is a dark, so putting him on that is generally better to give the Catastor effect. Just makes it a little trickier for him to be cleared by the enemy. You can put on the king though if you prefer to give her the extra protection. The only one I wouldn't recommend is Isolde. Isolde's going to die anyway, and it does put it out of Drystain protection range. So yeah, that's the first test stand. As you can see, we resolved Borz, resolved Isolde, and got a king out from a hand that at first looked good, but didn't have any swords in it. So let me go ahead and pick all these up. And what we're going to do is just shuffle these in and draw another hand. Now one thing I will say is that with this deck you're going to have to pile shuffle very often. As you saw, we tend to dump the swords and equip them in stacks, and what happens is they tend to clump together. So I definitely recommend pile shuffling every round. You may even pile shuffle in when you side, just if you've got the time. Don't hold up your opponent. Don't be a jerk about it. But your deck clumps pretty terribly, and you don't want to sit there with a handful of swords and 60 cards. That's not fun. Alright, so let's go ahead and draw another hand. And we're going to get... Oof, double nothing, that's rough. Destiny. Gawayn. Signing Deal. And Hector. So actually this hand is perfectly salvageable. Not a big deal at all. We're going to play Signing Deal. Once again, showing the value of these generic extenders. And let's go ahead and find that here. Summon Midfielder. Go ahead and normal summon Gawayn. Link the two of them off into a soul. The souls can add a card, and for the sake of ease, I'm actually not going to do this, but we're going to add brothers, because that's what you're going to want next turn. And we're going to summon Borz, equip Borz with the sword, and resolve Borz. And just like that, you've accomplished your goals. Yeah, the rest of the hand wasn't great, but you got Hector ready to go next turn. A dead card, in case you just felt like it. Yeah, can't complain. You hit all your goals. You are well set up for the grind game next turn. Let's shuffle these back in and draw another hand. And this time we have Gwynhwyfar, Arfudytyr, Brothers, Signing Deal again, and ROTA. Great hand, absolutely. So what we would want to do in this case, and interestingly here, it's actually okay because we can afford to risk hand trap. We're going to start with ROTA, I think, to go ahead and once test out the Ash, because the hand is playable if they Ash the ROTA. You would take these two into Assault, into Borz, into Resolve. But if they don't, we're going to actually go ahead and grab Medraut in this case, because you have the ability to play through. Now, I would generally only recommend attempting the riskier Medraut play when you can follow up the extender. If we had Dai instead, I would not grab Medraut, because Medraut has to be alone on the field, which means he can't be used after Dai, and he turns off Dai. But Signing Deal can be used at any time, so it's worth the risk. Normal. Equip. Effect to pull Borz. Let's go ahead and grab that. Destroys the sword. Sword equips. Borz is going to get you 3 of the trap, because you already have Gwynhwyfar. So we'll grab one there, and the other two are going to go to the grave. Go ahead and find that. Searching 60 cards for one is... There we go. At this point, you're going to want to do Signing Deal. Pay your life points to summon that out. You do have 2, but you actually want to keep Borz out for now. He's level 5, which is going to come in handy in a second. We're going to grab our copy of Midfielder. We're going to link the Midfielder and the Medraut into our copy of Assault. We're going to use Isolde's effect to add another Brothers to our hand. We do already have one, but we're going to grab a second one so that we are all set next turn to use the effect. If you would prefer, you can also choose to grab Custennin. That's an easy summon setup thanks to Gwynhwyfar there. But I really like Brothers, so we're going to get another copy of Brothers. And then what we'd probably end up doing is summoning the third off the trap, because drawing all the cards is nice. Then we're actually going to use the Soul Summon effect for 5. So when you're 5, I generally like Gallatin, Caliburn, Destiny, Excaliburn, and Arfudytyr. So let's grab, there's Excaliburn. We actually already have an Arfudytyr, so Clarent is also an option if you so choose. And I found Clarent first, so we'll do that because I am lazy. And Destiny. And here we have a point. We can summon Hector, which is going to easily recur next turn, and that's what I would generally recommend. So that's what we're going to do right here, because he can summon himself back every turn. With that said, if you know you are facing an OTK deck, I would actually instead summon Lancelot, because he can tribute off Assault to search something, and you don't want to leave that 1600 attack body out there to be OTK'd into if you're facing something like Crusadia. And then because he's a level 5 right now, since he's equipped with the sword, overlay these two. And this actually to bring up another effect of Hector I forgot to mention earlier. When you use him to Xyz, your opponent cannot respond. Summon your king in defense mode, the sword falls off. On summon, the king is going to equip himself with 3 swords. You're going to want Destiny, Caliburn, and Excaliburn, which we said earlier. And equip the Gwynhwyfar from your hand, set the trap, and there's your endboard. Borz resolves, you have your traps engraved, fully equipped king protected, and a follow-up play for next turn. Once again, just great hand played out, showing the value of those extenders. And let's do one more test hand. I actually kind of like to see a bricky hand just to kind of demonstrate what you do in that situation, because you do brick. It doesn't happen terribly often. The deck is built fairly consistently, but it does happen. And generally when it happens, you just kind of want to ride it out and see if you can follow it up next turn anyway. Do what you can. So, we have Vanilla Artorigus, Medraut, Custennin, Heritage, and Brothers. Alright, really good hand. So, we got a couple options here. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to start with Heritage, and we're going to try to get a sword in this case. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, if this is ashed, we have Brothers to go into a follow-up play with these two. So we can still make a play. If this is not ashed and we get a sword, which is what we'll do in this case, we're going to grab Caliburn. We could go for the safe Brothers play, but we risk the impermanence. Or we could normal Medraut, and note they can't impermanence or Veiler while he has no sword. He's a normal monster. Equip with a sword, now they can. Attempt to activate. Now, if they have Ogre, you're kind of SOL. But, other than that, assuming it goes through, you get Borz, and Borz will pull a sword and send your traps. If they don't, if they do hit it with something like an impermanence or a Veiler or an Ash, you can special the Custennin, go into a Sold, get the extra normal from Custennin, summon Borz, normal Brothers specials that, rank 4 king, equip, and Borz. So in this case, let's actually assume for a moment that they Ash Blossom or Veiler or Impermanence Medraut here, so the summon does not go off. To show you how you play through it. Special that. Link into Isolde. Chainlink 1 is sold to search. Chainlink 2 is going to be the re-equip of Caliburn to block it. Caliburn re-equips on. Search, and in this case, because we need to use the Brothers effect, I would say we're actually going to go ahead and search either Iyvanne to set up an OTK for next turn, or Hector. And I would go with Hector in this case because he's just useful to have in play. Let's go ahead and grab that. We're going to use the Sold Summon effect for 4. And remember, so we're assuming that this hand got Ash Blossomed at the Medraut summon, which is where less extension heavy builds tend to get stopped if they hit it at all. 2. We'll grab Gallatin since we already have a Caliburn in play. And Excaliburn is going to be our last one. And we'll grab that, put this aside for a moment. There we go. That's the summon 4. At this point we'll use our extra normal from Custennin on Brothers. Brothers effect will summon out Artorigus. We can't get Eachter as well because he can't be summoned the turn he searched for the Soul. Take these two, overlay them over to your rank 4 Archer. It is right here. Arthur's going to equip himself with some swords. We'll get that one, and that one right there. Arthur's effect will destroy a sword on the field. Don't do Caliburn. They can only re-equip once per turn. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and grab Destiny. Re-equip onto Borz. Right here. And now use Borz's effect to grab 2 copies of the trap. And Gwynhwyfar. One goes to your hand at random. Hopefully it's the trap, which you can set to get the draw the search next turn. But if it's Gwen, it's okay. Our zones are actually full, so we can't do Gwen from grave, but that's fine. And there we go. We resolved Borz, resolved Assault, have a king, all through an Ash Blossom. Or an Impermanence or a Veil, or any one of those. And just for fun, let's see, what do we dig up with that on the standby phase, because we reveal the top 4. We see Dai, not really good at this point. Gawayn, Callie, Ash. Look at that, we take an Ash. Now we have an Ash too. So it's safe to say our opponent is not going to win this. We're going to Ash them. We have a full follow-up play set up. We are golden. And because we have re-equipping swords distributed evenly among these 3 monsters, if any of them are targeted for removal, we can chain the trap to summon Drystain, have the sword fall into Drystain, and pop a card on the field. We have basically won this duel with anything short of a bust in hand to will fail to break this. So hopefully that gave you a bit of an idea on how we play out some of these hands. Didn't see any bad hands, but that should speak well to the deck, honestly. And like I said, we tested that hand. We even pretended we were ashed at probably the most common choke point, which is the Medraut summon. So can't complain too much. Quickly throw another test hand out there, just see what we get. 1 Garnet, 1 Arthur, Heritage, Medraut, and Custennin. Oh yeah, so as long as this one is susceptible to the Ash Blossom, but if we get the sword off that, we're golden. Sword onto him, summon Borz, if it's negated, summon that, repeat. Can't complain. Alright, now I'm going to switch this back up to me for final thoughts. Okay, so now I've shown you my list. I've answered some of the more common questions, which is why do you play 60 to fit more extenders? Why don't you play Merlin? Because it's bad. I've shown you a couple test hands and how I would play them out, as well as demonstrate resilience through hand traps. And so I want to finish this up with some closing thoughts. Knights are not meta. They won't be meta. They shouldn't be meta. They are rogue. But they are good. And people underestimate them often because they're stuck in the mentality of a deck that is Medraut or Dai to make a boss monster that if it's cleared, the deck loses. That's not the case. Now, why would you play this deck? And the answer is you really have to be passionate about it. There are better decks out there, but there are advantages to playing something like this. For one, people generally don't know how to counter them, and so you can use that to your advantage. If someone has to work out over the course of a match how to out your boards, how to clear them, what cards to hit and when, you have the upper hand the whole way through, especially if you know their deck better, which is kind of a key point I want to get to. This is the kind of deck that demands pilot excellence. There have been days when I'm playing this deck and I am not playing right and I am not feeling it, and misplay after misplay, and I get nowhere. This is the kind of deck that rewards understanding. It rewards thinking. It is not an autopilot sort of deck, because since you are not just trying to, vomit out the same combo, instead you have to constantly think about how do I accomplish my goals? What do I want to set up for next turn? What summons in turns 3, 5, 7, so on are going to be the correct order? How do I break this board and move in for the kill? It requires understanding of the format. If you know an opponent's deck, you can predict what cards they have, when they'll use them, how they'll use them, and you'll know the correct way to dismantle it. But it takes experience. I have said multiple times that playing Noble Knights in a competitive setting has made me a better player, and I mean it. It has forced me to learn how to analyze my opponent. It has forced me to learn how to deal with each format as it comes, how to think a turn or two ahead, how to plan. But it's been rewarding, and that's, I guess, the real answer. Why would you choose this deck over Salamangrate, over Sky Striker? And I did. I have Sky Striker fully built. I almost took it to last regional, and I took Knights instead. And it's because and the answer is, if you enjoy it, and if you love the deck the way I do, if you're passionate about it, and you've put the time in, and you understand it, it will give you what you put into it. It will take you to success. And frankly, it'll earn you a lot of respect for doing it. Opponents are much less likely to be frustrated, I guess, if they are impressed and wowed by you. I love that I sat down at one of my top table matches last regional, and the guy next two tables down turns and says, "You are not this high with Noble Knights." I love that feeling. I love taking a deck like this somewhere, playing it better than people thought possible, and showing them that yes, it can be done. And it gives hope for the format. So that's why I play it, and if you enjoy being that person who can take an unknown deck to new heights, I think you will enjoy it too. It is great for people who like puzzles. It is great for people who love the strategic board play and taking a turn to a head, and it's rewarding. Plus the art's gorgeous. So that's everything I have to say about the deck for now. If you got any questions, feel free to let me know. I'm always happy to talk about it. Otherwise, I do recommend joining the Noble Knight Discord. We discuss it all the time. I'll have a link to that as well. And yeah, thanks for watching.